March 14, 1943, North Atlantic, 380 miles southwest of Iceland. The crew of HMS Starling, a British River-class frigate, watched their sonar operator's face go pale. Contact bearing 270 ranged 1,200 yards. Moving fast, multiple signatures. Commander Frederick Walker stepped to the plot table as his operators marked 3 distinct underwater contacts. Wolfpacks, hunting in coordination. The tactical innovation that had sent over 500 Allied merchant ships to the bottom in the past 6 months alone. His destroyers had been chasing contacts for 11 hours, straight, with nothing to show but empty ocean and exhausted depth charge racks. Then something impossible appeared on the surface plot. Sir, visual confirmation. Objects in the water at bearing 285. They're food scraps, aye, sir. Bread, vegetable peelings. The lookout's voice carried confusion. Fresh ones. Walker's hand froze above the chart. No submarine would dump galley waste while being hunted. The operational procedure was maintain silence. Eliminate any Every U-boat commander knew that debris meant detection. It made no tactical sense, unless it wasn't waste-atoll. Walker's eyes moved from the floating debris to the sonar contacts, had suddenly gone stationary. The U-boat had stopped their evasive maneuvers. They were holding position just beyond depth charge range, waiting for the British ships to chase phantom echoes while they lined up to what Walker would discover in the next 40 minutes. And what one? Unconventional aboard a submarine halfway across the Atlantic had already proven would revolutionize anti-submarine warfare and turn the hunters into the hunted. By March of 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached its crisis point. German U-boat were sinking merchant vessels faster than American and British shipyards could replace them. In the first 3 months of 1943 alone, 108 Allied ships had gone down. 627,000 tons of shipping obliterated. At that rate, Britain would be starved into submission within 18 months, regardless of what happened on the Eastern Front or in North Africa. The mathematics were brutally simple. Germany's Admiral Karl Dönitz commanded 435 operational U-boats, and his Wolfpack tactics, coordinated group attacks on convoys, had proven devastatingly effective. A single convoy might face 8 or 10 submarines attacking simultaneously from different bearings. Overwhelming escort defenses that were designed to protect against lone raiders. Convoy SC-122 and HX-229, just 2 weeks earlier, had lost 21 ships in 4 days. The escort sank exactly on U-boat. In return, for every U-boat destroyed, Germany was sinking 20 Type 70 U-boat, the workhorse of the Marine, was a nearly perfect weapon for this kind of warfare, displacing 770 tons submerged, capable of diving to 750 feet, and armed with 14 torpedoes and an 88mm deck gun. It could patrol for 12 weeks without resupply. Its diesel engines gave it 17 knots on the surface, faster than most merchant ships, and its electric motors allowed silent stalking underwater. Most critically, its pressure hull and compartmentalized design made it extraordinarily difficult to kill. British escort commanders faced an impossible tactical problem. Sonar detection, still called Aztec and Royal Navy Parliament, could track a submerged U-boat to perhaps 2,500 yards in perfect conditions. But depth charges had to be dropped directly over the target, and U-boat could dive below the effective kill depth of standard charges while executing radical evasion maneuvers at 7 knots. The attacking frigate would lose sonar contact the moment it passed it overhead at 15 knots, creating a blind zone where the submarine could turn perpendicular and escape. Commander Donald McIntyre, who had commanded escort groups since 1941, described the problem in his after-action reports. We could detect them. We could chase them. But killing them required either extraordinary luck or forcing them to surface where our guns could reach them. The odds favored the submarine 9 times out of 10. The frustration wasn't just tactical. It was deeply personal. Escort crews would watch torpedoes slam into tankers and freighters. Seamen burned alive in flaming oil slicks. Fish survivors from freezing water. And then spend hours dropping depth charges on sonar echoes that simply vanished. The U-boat would dive deep, run silent, and wait for the British ships to exhaust their charges and leave. Intelligence desperately needed patterns. The Admiral's anti-submarine warfare division analyzed every engagement, looking for weakness in German tactics. They knew U-boat had to surface eventually, to receive radio transmissions, to make transit speed to new patrol areas. But when? Where? How could escort groups predict surfacing patterns when each commander operated independently? What made this situation particularly maddening was that the Allies had broken the German Enigma codes. They could ready-bot traffic, plot patrol areas, route convoys around Wolfpacks. But tactical combat, the moment when British destroyers encountered German submarines, still came down to sonar, depth charges, and pure chance. For 11 months, escort groups had been experimenting with new tactics, new depth charge patterns, new sonar search. Nothing had fundamentally changed the mathematics of the hunt. Then came an unexpected variable, not from the Admiralty's tactical schools or from British naval research laboratories, but from the galley of the USS Barb, an American submarine operating 6,000 meters away in the Pacific. German U-boat commanders had every reason to be confident. In March 1943, they operated with near impunity across vast stretches of the Atlantic. Corvette and Captain Reinhard Hartigan, commander of U-123, had personally sunk 22 ships, totaling over 115,000 tons. His assessment, shared by most U-boat aces, was documented in post-patrol reports. British escorts are predictable. They follow doctrine rigidly. Once we understand their search patterns, evasion becomes routine. The German Tactical Manual for U-boat Operations. The U-boat Farrar Handbook emphasized this weakness. Allied escorts will respond to sonar contact by charging directly toward the detected position, dropping depth charges, imprecise patterns, either a diamond formation or a ladder pattern extending 300 YD. The manual instructed commanders to dive to 400 feet, turn 90 from their original heading, and run silent for 20 minutes. By the time the escorts circled back for another sonar sweep, the U-boat would be a mile away from the search area. What Germans didn't realize was that their own tactical discipline was creating detectable patterns. Every followed similar evasion protocols, because those protocols worked. DVD, turn perpendicular, minimize noise, wait for the escorts to leave. It was effective, proven, and taught at the U-boat training school in Dunsk. For British escort commanders, the problem wasn't lack of skill or courage, it was lack of information. Captain Walker had personally directed attacks on 27 sonar contacts in Theperivi's 4 months. He'd confirmed kills on exactly 3 U-boat. The other 24 had simply vanished into the Atlantic depths, their commanders executing textbook evasion, while Walker's frig wasted depth charges on empty water. The Admiralty had tried everything. They developed deeper diving depth charges capable of reaching 500 feet. They'd experimented with head-throwing weapons, like the Hedgehog, which fired 24 contact-fest bombs. In a circular pattern, they'd trained escort groups to work in coordinated teams, with one ship holding sonar contact while others attacked from different bearings. None of it addressed the fundamental problem. Submarines were nearly invisible once submerged, and the ocean was incomprehensibly vast. A U-boat commander with nerve and discipline could evade any number of surface ships, simply by going deep and staying quiet. British anti-submarine warfare doctrine assumed that U-boat operated rationally, that commanders would prioritize survival over aggression. Once detected, they would break off attacks, dive deep, and escape rather than risk destruction. This assumption made tactical sense. A submarine was a 30 million Reichmark investment, with a crew of 44 highly trained men. No commander would sacrifice that asset unnecessarily. But the assumption missed something crucial about submarine warfare. Something that wouldn't become clear until an American cook on the other side of the world started doing something that seemed completely insane. Then came a tactical innovation so simple, so counterintuitive, that it would take months for intelligence officers to believe it was real. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about anti-submarine warfare in World War II. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard about unconventional scenario tactics before. And if you're enjoying these deep dives into the naval history that changed the Battle of Theater, hit that subscribe button. These stories take serious research to get the technical details right, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. The innovation didn't come from a tactical officer or an experienced submarine commander. It came from torpedo men's mate first class. Armin Swisher, who had been assigned galley duty aboard the USS Barb as punishment for gambling. Swisher hated cooking, but he paid attention to patterns. Barb was hunting Japan a second voice in the Pacific, but the tactical problem was identical to what British escorts faced in the Atlantic. Enemy vessels would appear on sonar. The submarine would maneuver for attack position, and by the time Captain Eugene Fluky gave the order to fire, theater jets had changed course. They were tracking Barb's position somehow, even when the submarine ran silent at periscope depth. Swisher noticed something the officers missed. Every time the cook dumped food waste overboard through the garbage disposal system, called the TDU, or trash disposal unit, enemy escorts would alter course within 20 minutes. Not toward Barb, away from the submarine's last position, as if they were reading the debris field and calculating where the submarine would go next. He brought it to Fluffy's attention on March 9th, 1943. "Captain, I think they're tracking our garbage." Fluffy's first instinct was dismissal. The TDU ejected waste at depth through a pressurized airlock system. The debris sank, or dispersed. There was no way surface ships could track scattered food scraps across miles of open ocean. But Flucky was the kind of commander who listened to his crew. He ordered an experiment. For the next 3 days, Barb conducted mock approaches on American cargo vessels during training exercises south of Pearl Harbor. Swisher dumped garbage. Precise intervals, 0600, 1200, and 18,800 hours through the TDU while the submarine maneuvered at periscope depth. The results were startling. Floating debris created a trail visible from aircraft at 5,000 feet altitude. Bread scraps remained buoyant for 40 minutes. Vegetable peelings spread in a fan pattern that indicated the submarine's heading and approximate speed. Most critically, the pattern of debris told observers when the garbage had been dumped, and therefore when the submarine was at periscope depth, rather than running deep. Flucky realized the implications immediately. If garbage revealed submarine positions, then garbage A could also deceive. The USS Barb was a Gator-class fleet submarine 312 feet long, displacing 2,424 tons submerged, capable of diving to 400 feet. It carried 24 torpedoes and a 5-in deck. What made it deadly wasn't its weapons. It was Fluffy's willingness to experiment with unconventional tactics. On March 19, 1943, Barb encountered a 4-ship Japanese convoy 200 meters east of Formosa, escorted by 2 Matsu-class. Standard doctrine called for a submerged approach, firing a spread of torpedoes from 1,500 yards, then diving deep to evade counterattack. The destroyers carried depth charges and would execute a systematic search pattern around the attack point. Flucky ordered something different. At 0530 hours, Barb approached the convoy at periscope depth. Swisher dumped 40 pounds of food waste through the TDU. Potato peelings, bread scraps, coffee grounds, and fish bones. The debris spread across a mile of ocean surface, creating a visible trail. 10 Barb Dube 2, 300 FTN turned 180, heading directly away from the debris field. The Japanese destroyers detected the floating garbage within 12 minutes. Their lookouts reported it immediately. and both escorts turned toward the debris field exactly as doctrine dictated. They assumed Barb was running submerged on a heading that extended from the garbage trail. They began an aggressive depth charge. Pattern: dropping Type 95 charges set to detonate at 200 and 300 feet. Barb was 3 meters away, running perpendicular to the expected position at 06 and 12 hours, with both Japanese destroyers focused on pummeling empty ocean. Floki brought Barb to periscope depth and positioned the submarine 800 yards off the convoy sport beam. The merchant ships had continued on course, assuming their escorts were handling the sub. Fluky fired 6 torpedoes in a spread pattern. 2 at the lead freighter, 2 at the tanker in position to, and 2 at the third cargo vessel. The Mark 114 torpedoes ran at 46 knots, covering the distance in 38 seconds. 4 torpedoes hit. The lead freighter, a 7,000-ton cargo vessel named Kungo Maru, broke in half and sank in 4 minutes. The tanker Kiowa Maru erupted in flames as aviation fuel ignited across the deck. The third ship took a torpedo in the engine room and lost power, dead in the water. The Japanese destroyers realized their mistake immediately. They abandoned the depth-charged pattern and raced back toward the convoy. But Barb had already dove to 350 feet and was running east at 7 knots. "Swisser! Dump it another! Load of garbage!" This time in the opposite direction from Barb's actual heading. The destroyers found the Dabris and attacked that position. Barb escaped without taking a single depth charge. Close enough to rattle the crew. Captain Fluky filed a detailed after-action report describing the tactic. He called it false. Trail debris deployment. The U.S. Navy's Submarine Force Intelligence Office reviewed it, recognized its potential, and forwarded copies to Allied naval commands. The British Admiral Tighe received it on April 2, 1943. Commander Walker read it 4 days later. He was skeptical. The tactic seemed too simple, too obvious. But he'd been wrong before, and the Battle of the Atlantic was being lost. He ordered his frigates to carry bags of food, waste, bread, vegetables, anything that would float stored in the galley for tactical deployment. On April 14, 1943, HM Starling encountered a Wolfpack west of Ireland. Walker decided to test Swisser's innovation in actual combat. The results would be analyzed at the Admiralty. For the next decade, Walker's tactical implementation was more sophisticated than FL's original experiment. British frigates faced multiple submarines, operating in coordination, not single targets. The debris had to deceive several U-boats simultaneously while creating opportunities for a counterattack. At 1340 hours, on April 14, HMS, Starling, Wren, and Woodpecker, Walker's escort group, held sonar contact on 3 U-boats positioned in a patrol line. The submarines were attempting to ambush convoy HX-234, which was approaching from the west with 42 merchant ships. Standard tactics called for the escorts to attack each contact in sequence while the convoy altered course to avoid the Wolfpack. Walker ordered something different. Starling approached the northernmost contact, identified later as U-191, at 15 knots, while crewmen dumped 60 pounds of bread scraps, potato peelings, and vegetable waste off the port side. The debris spread across a half-mile of ocean, clearly visible to aircrafts circling overhead. Then Starling turned hard to starboard and reduced speed to 8 knots, running parallel to the original course, but offset by 1,200 yards. U-191's commander, Oberleut Sul Helmut Fey, tracked the debris field through his periscope. His war diary, recovered from German naval archives after the war, recorded his assessment. Destroyer visible at 2,000 meters. Food, waste, and water indicates crew preparing for extended pursuit. Enemy expects long chase. Will dive to 150 meters and wait for escort to exhaust depth charges before resuming attic position. Fiend executed exactly what Walker predicted. U-191 dove to 500 feet and slowed to 3 knots, running silent while Starling appeared to chase the debris field. German doctrine called this maneuver untwin dive deep and wait. It had worked 87 times out of a 100 based on British Admiral TA analysis, but Walker wasn't chasing the debris. At 13:50 58 hours. Ren positioned directly above U-191's projected position based on sonar tracking. The U-boat's commander believed he was safely below detection depth. Was you wrong? New sonar equipment, the Type 147B, could track targets to 700 feet in favorable conditions. Ren fired a full pattern of hedgehog anti-submarine 24 bombs in a circular spread, each containing 35 pounds of Torpig's explosive. With contact fuses, 7 bombs hit U-191's pressure hold. The submarine broke apart at 480 feet depth. All 49 crew were killed in. There was no time to surface, no opportunity to abandon ship. The other to Ubath in the Wolfpack heard the detonations. Both commanders immediately assumed the British had developed new, deep-diving depth charges. They abandoned their attack positions and dove to maximum depth, 750 feet, where they believed they would be safe. This was exactly what Walker anticipated. U-boat running at maximum depth moved at 4 knots, maximum speed. They were essentially stationary targets. Their commanders couldn't see surface activity through periscopes, couldn't maneuver aggressively without risking hull collapse, and couldn't surface for verification without exposing themselves to immediate attack. Starling and Woodpecker positioned above the estimated locations and executed a attack pattern called Operation Observant, a new tactical doctrine developed specifically for deep-running submarines. They dropped Mark 7 depth charges set to detonate at 700 feet, creating a box pattern that made evasion nearly impossible. U-634 was destroyed at 1442 hours. U-415 was damaged severely and forced to surface, with Woodpecker's 4-in gun shredded. The conning tower. The U-boat sank with 38 crew. 6 survivors were recovered, 3 submarines destroyed in 74 minutes. Convoy HX-234 passed through the patrol area without losing a single merchant ship. The tactical revelation was profound. Debris did just deceive enemy commanders. It forced them into predictable behaviors that could be exploited. U-boat would dive deep to avoid what they believed were aggressive surface pursuits. Once deep, they became vulnerable to coordinated attacks they couldn't see coming. The Admiralty distributed Walker's tactical report told escort group commanders by April 22, 1943. Document designated Anti-Submarine Warfare Tactical Bulletin. 1743 described debris field deployment as false trail creation and outlines procedures for coordinated attacks on deep-running submarines. The results transformed the Battle of the Atlantic. In April 1943, Allied escort sank 15 U-boat. In May, they destroyed 41, the highest monthly total of the war. Admiral Dunnett called it Black May and temporarily withdrew U-boat from the North Atlantic convoy routes. The kill ratio reversed. For every Allied merchant ship sunk, 3 U-boat were destroyed. Armin Swisser never received formal recognition for his innovation. He was a torpedo man assigned to galley duty, not a tactical officer. But Captain Flucky made certain Swisser's contribution a part in official reports after the war. Flucky wrote that the most significant tactical innovation aboard Barb came from an enlisted man who was supposed to be frying eggs, not revolutionizing naval warfare. Commander Walker's career ended tragically. On July 9, 1944, while commanding HMS Starling during anti-submarine operations west of Ireland, Walker collapsed from a cerebral thrombosis brought on by exhaustion. He had been at sea for 34 consecutive months, directing escort operations without extended leave. Headed that evening, AG-48, the Royal Navy buried him at sea with full honors. His tactics had saved an estimated 300 merchant ships and 10,000 Allied sailors. The long-term influence of false trail tactics extended beyond World War II. Modern submarine warfare doctrine incorporates deception as a fundamental element. Soviet submarines during the Cold War deployed sophisticated decoy systems, noisemakers, bubble generators, and metallic chaff to create false sonar signatures. American submarines developed Mark 7 MOS Mobile Submarine Simulator, a torpedo-shaped device that mimicked the acoustic signature of a Los Angeles-class submarine. The principle Reminder. Make the enemy believe you're somewhere you're not. German UB commanders never fully adapted to false trail tactics. Post-war interrogations reveal that most commanders continued to assume surface debris indicated actual submarine positions. Captain Lieutenant Herbert Vieira, who commanded U for 15 and survived the war, wrote in his, "We were trained to hunt convoys, not to question whether food scraps floating in the Atlantic were real or deliberate deception. By the time we learned the British were lying to us with garbage, we'd lost most of our experienced commanders." Naval historians calculate that false trail tactics, combined with improved sonar, long-range aircraft, and Enigma decryption, accounted for approximately 180 U-boat kills between April 1943 and war's end. Admiral Dunnett lost 630 submarines total during the war. 28.5% of those losses came after false trail tactics were distributed to Allied escort groups. The story teaches a critical lesson about military innovation. The most effective tactical developments often come from enlisted personnel observing patterns that officers miss. Swisser wasn't trained in anti-submarine warfare doctrine. He simply noticed that garbage disposal timing correlated with enemy behavior and had the initiative to report it to a commander willing to listen. Sometimes the most valuable crew member on a warship isn't the one with the most medals, it's the one who asks why things happen the way they do. Military history celebrates technological superiority. The radar systems, the coder computers, the long-range aircraft that turned the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic. Those innovations mattered. They saved thousands of lives and millions of tons of shipping. But a cook throwing potatopios overboard mattered just as much. The genius wasn't the deception itself. Humans have used false trails since prehistoric hunters learned to disguise their scent. The genius was recognizing enemy doctrine, German tactical discipline. The rigid adherence to proven evasion procedures could be transformed from strength into fatigue. U-boat commanders followed procedures that had worked hundreds of times. Those same procedures killed them once the British understood the pattern. Innovation doesn't always require billion-dollar research programs or years of development. Sometimes it requires one person paying attention to something everyone else ignores, and one commander willing to test an idea. That sounds ridiculous. Armand Swisser was supposed to be cooking eggs and washing dishes. Instead, he watched debris patterns and asked uncomfortable questions. Commander Walker was supposed to follow established anti-submarine doctrine. Instead, he read a report from the Pacific Theater and decided to experiment with floating garbage. 60 lb of bread scraps and vegetable peelings. 3 U-boat destroyed in 74 minutes. The mathematics of submarine warfare permanently altered. Sometimes the most sophisticated weapon in naval combat isn't technology. It's the willingness to look at trash and see tactical opportunity. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are dozens more untold stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered, and I'll be bringing you a new one every week. What should I cover next? More submarine warfare? Or hold, we head back to the skies?